There you go. Friday, and all of today's guests, including Thomas Drance, standing by, brought to you by the Bayside Oceanfront Resort. Get ready for winter with an unbeatable stay at the Bayside Oceanfront Resort this season. They're offering 25% off their best available rate all winter long on weekday stays with a minimum 2-night booking, whether it's a cozy coastal getaway, you like those, Rick, or a serene retreat. Don't miss this exclusive offer. Call them directly, 250-248-8333, or visit us at BaysideResortParksville.com to book your event or your getaway today. Just before we get to Thomas Delaney's OK Tire and Langley inbox, Phil from Richmond. I can't get into how Phil's having some fun with us here.
His last name.
We'll just stop right there. Phil from Richmond. Rick, if Ryan had paid his dues up north like you guys, his body would have been better able to handle the bug he's battling. So true.
Donnie, you and I walked in minus 20, 25 weather up in Fort St. John, minus 25, minus 30 every day. I lived a block away from the radio station. It was tough. I had a mustache. The mustache would freeze, nose hairs.
You lived a block away? It must have been a real tough block.
Don, it's minus 20, 25 outside. We got toughened up. You and Dawson Creek, me and Fort St. John, Ryan didn't pay his dues. I'm sorry. A lot of kids don't pay their dues anymore. And you know what? They're not better off for it, Don.
And he's paying for it now. Thomas Drance, he's paid his dues from the Athletic. Canucks hosting Columbus tonight. Thomas, thanks for doing this. As always on a Friday, how are you? You're all bundled up.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm paying my dues by staying warm. You know, when you have a block and a half walk in somewhat bad weather, gotta. You know what you guys reminded me of? There's an old Monty Python sketch where they're all one-upping each other with like old person complaints. You know, like we had to walk uphill to school both ways, right? And John Cleese wins it by saying, you know, I remember when I was a child, our parents used to murder us every night. Right?
Well, you're paying your dues by doing this hit every week, so good on you. Good on you. Hey, what's your read on Thatcher Demko's return to game action?
I mean, seems close. I think he's probably been close for a bit, but there's a distinction between return to play and return to performance, and you can understand, given the stakes of this specific situation, why it would be a somewhat more complicated one than your average player returns from injury type scenario. There's contractual considerations here. Demko is going to be extension eligible come July 1. Right. There's, obviously the unprecedented nature of the injury itself. And there's the scientific and thoughtful way that Demko approaches everything, first of all, but especially his recovery, his own body and this ailment. So, I mean, reading between the lines of some of the commentary yesterday feels like he's not going to start tonight, but we'll see shortly. The Canucks are already beginning to take the ice for morning skate here at Rogers Arena. I would guess he doesn't start tonight, but I would think we see him in the next handful of games, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's backing up, as he alluded to, as soon as this evening.
What's your read, Thomas? We touched on this in the first segment. Your read on the Canucks season so far, it is so strange. First of all the adversity that they've faced. I know it's a broad question. But injuries and leave of absences and the poor home record, great away from home, great on the road. Sure. It's just so strange.
The vibe has been odd, right? And yet, I think this team's ability to hang around in the Pacific Division, right? And they're well positioned, but they're also positioned in sort of a fragile way, right? There's not a lot of space between them and, for example, Vegas, leading the Pacific at the moment, but there's also not a lot of space between them and Calgary or Edmonton, right? Where you could very quickly lose 2 of 3 or 3 of 4 and find yourself in 5th place in the Pacific. So, in a lot of ways, this team deserves credit, I think, for just maintaining their positioning. I think we know that down the stretch, this group, if they're healthy, right? If they're are icing a lineup that more closely approximates the one we were looking at on paper in training camp, that they're going to have the ability to tick off a run of games at like a 700 point percentage. I mean, I think we all know that this team has that type of talent. We haven't seen it yet. And I think we haven't seen it yet for a variety of reasons. I think the injuries and absences have played a significant role there for sure. I think the fact that the team has struggled to start games somewhat regularly I think there's been some internal hand-wringing about their, occasional lack of focus or the inconsistency of their focus, the commitment to playing the quote-unquote right way, as this organization defines it. I think they've fallen short of that standard, at least when it comes to consistency, regardless of the injury. So I think that's been part of it. The home road thing is completely baffling. I suspect that it's just small sample noise, but certainly if they don't kick off a pretty strong homestand here, and really it's 2 homestands, 9 of the next 11 here at Rogers Arena, that would be bizarre. And that would certainly become something where you can't write it off as just being random over stretches of 10 games or less. That would feel more substantive. And obviously that's disappointing for the paying customers coming to these games. So you certainly hope to see this team make Rogers Arena a fortress once again, as it was last year. What do I make of this team? I think what we've seen from this team is that they've got a high floor, right? We know that they're a playoff caliber team, right? And it seems that they're a playoff caliber team almost regardless of who is in or out of the lineup. Like, honestly, so long as number 43 is on the ice, I suspect that this team is going to tick along at a 95 to 100 point pace relatively easily, regardless of what else is sort of affecting them. What we've yet to see is what the ceiling case for this group might look like. Like, we just haven't seen it. It's purely hypothetical. We know it's there. We saw it at times last year, but I have no idea what this team's ceiling is because, honestly, I just don't feel like I've seen it in any sustained manner at this point throughout the campaign.
Thomas, look at the trade front. Obviously, they're working the phones. There's no panic. The team's well over 500. Miller's coming back. Demko's coming back. They're still out there making phone calls. I still think they're trying to get that Pettersson defenseman out of Pittsburgh. But what would you do right now? I mean, go get that guy or wait a little bit until they're healthy, then make a move?
I mean, I think if you're going to make a move, like, the problem, Rick, is the prices.
Yeah.
The problem is the prices.
Yeah.
And, I like Marcus Pettersson. I probably have more margin I'm probably a little bit higher than industry standard on Marcus Pettersson, especially when it comes to his offensive toolkit, right? I mean, not that he's, an offensive driver from the back. He's a pretty good passer. He can do some creative things in zone once he's set up. Like, I think there's more to his game than I think most scouting reports suggest. So I like the player a lot. I think he would be a big help for this Canucks blue line. But at the end of the day, I still think you're talking about a guy who's a 3-4, right? Like, I still think you're talking about a guy who's probably not moving the needle for this team and who, push comes to shove, if Carson Soucy finds the form that he had last year, which I suspect he will. I thought he was better in November than he was in the first month of the season, for example. I do think you're going to get to a point where it's like, are we even playing this guy in front of Carson Soucy? Right. And so how much are you going to pay to have a maybe upgrade over Carson Soucy? Right. Like, that's the problem. How much are you going to pay to bring in a Mike Matheson, who's not going to get 60 points in Vancouver because he's not going to play the power play? And who, again, you're going to get into a situation where Rick Tocchet's looking at his options and Adam Foote are looking at their options, and they're saying, well, where are we going to even play this guy ahead of Carson Soucy? Are we even going to play him ahead of Eric Brandstrom? Yeah, I mean, probably with Brandstrom, but maybe not. Brandstrom's been pretty good for this team. So, I think if you're going to swing a deal, my view of this anyway, is that the Canucks should absolutely be aggressive, provided that, the Miller and Demko situations continue to trend as positively as they seem to have over the last 48 hours to a week. I think this team should absolutely be bolstering their chances with this group or around this group. But, I think if you're going to pay the sorts of prices that it's going to take to land, upgrades on your back end, I think they need to be needle movers. I think you need to be aiming higher. I think you need to be getting guys with term. I think you need to be avoiding playing in the rental market. For as much fun as last season was, you go over the assets that they parted with for Lindholm and Zadorov, and it's like, I mean, there was 40 games, 50 games worth of those players for an awful lot of sort of, future weaponry to spend to get this team over the hump in future seasons. So I do think they have to be mindful of it, especially with sort of where they're positioned. I'm all for this team spending assets and pushing chips into the center of the table, but I do think you need to be careful, not in terms of mitigating what you're spending, but in terms of getting pieces that are long-term fits and actually move the needle, are significant upgrades. And I think that's sort of the way that they're thinking about it internally too.
Thomas, JT Miller is close. He started skating this week. I'm going to guess there's going to be a lot of sigh of relief from a lot of the parties involved when he's back because of all the nonsense reporting and how carried away everyone got with what's – look, bottom line, he needed some time. He's taken it. Let the guy give him his time. But it's close. He's almost back, and they can kind of get back to being somewhat normal and away from this, all the sidetrack, everything that took place in the last 2 weeks. Would you agree?
I mean, I'm sure. Look, this team needs JT Miller back. Like, as much as they succeeded on this past road trip, like, I don't think their power play looks as sharp without JT Miller. They're 29th in faceoff win percentage since he left the lineup. They managed to grind out wins, but I didn't think their form looked all that great. It's one of those interesting things where hats off to the team for the effort that they put in, right? Like, no one's going to question the effort of the games on that successful 6-game road trip, nor should they. But, you see like Kaprizov completely kick their teeth in 5-on-5 in that Minnesota game. And it's like, okay, well, that's a moment where you can see the seams that this club misses Miller. As much as Lankinen stepped up and DeBrusque stepped up and Garland stepped up and Pettersson stepped up and on down the line, and you love to see that from any team. But JT Miller's a really important player for this group. He's obviously a really important presence internally for this entire organization. And yeah, getting him back, I think is going to be a huge boost for them on the ice, and I'm sure off of it as well. As for the speculation, I mean, a lot of it took place externally outside the market, right? And it was just such an odd situation. And I don't mean it's no problem if a player needs to step away. I think we all agree that mental health is actual health, right? I think but it just looked different than the situations that we've seen in the past, the Drance situation or the Spencer Knight situations where players have entered the player assistance program. I think that created questions. I totally understand respecting a player's privacy. And I think by and large, like I have in my coverage, you gentlemen have in your coverage, I think most of the local media pool, in fact, to a man, I think everyone in the local media pool has respected that. But, you can understand, like I'm getting texts today from buddies who just happen to be buying tickets to the game. What are the chances that JT Miller's in the lineup? And look, they just want to see one of their favorite players play. And so, that I do think it's a difficult balance between what sort of transparency you owe your customers, you're the fans of this team, and what sort of privacy you need to grant a player. And then the speculation, I think, is an inevitable sort of outcropping of sort of leaning a little too heavily on the privacy side, right? Putting out a statement where we had questions and there was no venue to get any sort of follow-up on them. And I'm not talking about private questions. I'm not talking about like what's going on specifically or anything like that, but little things like, where is he on the roster, right? Like, do you have a roster space? Does his cap hit still count? Like little things that, I think we had reasonable follow-ups on that there was no answers for. The club's clearly talking about now having a plan for his return. And again, are you sort of, how do you walk that fine line between wanting to respect a player's privacy on a personal matter, but also wanting to have a sense, like if there's a plan for a ramp up of his activity that includes him returning, to the lineup or even an approximate date, like, is it not respecting his privacy? Like, are you respecting your fans by not giving them more details of when that might be, especially over the holiday season when they're considering their sort of ticket buying options and how to spend their disposable income on social events and client events and stuff surrounding Canucks games? So, these are tricky sort of real-time issues that teams have to work through and manage. There's relationships to manage. There's player privacy to manage. There's player health to manage. All of that is vitally important. But I also think, providing at least a modicum of transparency to your customers matters too. And there should be an ability to have adult conversations about exactly how teams manage this, sort of all the various interests at play and sort of how it's done without necessarily sort of coming down and it being like, well, you're bringing this up and that's disrespectful to the player. Like, I don't know. I think there's got to be some space to question how it's being done and whether or not fans and media and on, people who pay to see this team have enough information to make informed decisions, and also being respectful of a player's need to have privacy and take care of themselves, which I think we all are very supportive of. More than that, it'll just be great to see him back on the ice.
This is your best look, by the way. You're looking sharp. Yeah, the jacket goes with the wall. I'm liking it. You know what? You've got a Travis Kelce vibe going on right now. I think you're excited about Taylor Swift being in town.
Yeah. You know what? My 12-year-old niece just got tickets today. I got to see her face as my sister, her mom, broke the news to her that they'd be going to see the Eras tour today.
How nice
she absolutely lost her mind. And then to her little brother. The mom's like, and you get to go to a sleepover. He got the short end of the stick. I told him I'd take him to a hockey game.
There you go.
So I tried to make it up to him.
Thomas, thanks for this. Looking good.
Cheers, gentlemen.